You're just another street punk with a chip on your shoulder. You think you're going somewhere? You're going nowhere." Judge Arthur Sterling's voice, cold and sharp as shattered glass, sliced through the cavernous silence of the courtroom. His gavel struck the polished wood with a crack like bone breaking, a sound of absolute finality. Marcus Vance stood alone before the bench, 18 years old, his shoulders squared not with defiance, but with a profound, bone-deep weariness that no young man should ever know. He held the gaze of every single person in that room, a sea of detached, curious faces, and felt the crushing weight of their collective judgment. The judge, a man whose face seemed chiseled from granite and disapproval, leaned forward, his black robes pooling around him like shadows. "I know your type," he sneered, the words slithering from his lips. Another statistic in the making. His finger, bony and accusatory, jabbed the air, a phantom weapon aimed straight at Marcus's heart. "No guidance, no discipline, no father figure to teach you right from wrong." The judge's lips twisted into a cruel smirk, a caricature of a smile. "Speaking of which, where is your father anyway? Too busy to show up for his own boy's day in court?" The question hung in the air, thick with insinuation and contempt. Marcus's composure didn't crack. His eyes, clear and steady, remained locked on the judge. He took a slow, deliberate breath. "May I call him, Your Honor?" The request was quiet, respectful, yet it carried an undercurrent of something else, something that made a few people in the back rows shift in their seats. Judge Sterling let out a short, barking laugh. "By all means," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Call him, if he even bothers to answer." What this judge didn't know, what no one in this room could possibly comprehend, was the storm that was about to break. Before we witness the fallout from that single phone call, ask yourself, have you ever been judged unfairly, silenced before you could even speak? If you believe in the power of truth to shatter lies, then prove it. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for beat stories, because you are about to witness a reckoning. Marcus reached into his pocket, his movements unhurried, pulling out a simple, unadorned smartphone. The entire courtroom watched, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity on their faces. He dialed a number from memory. The phone rang once, twice. Then a voice answered on the other end. Marcus's own voice remained impossibly level, a calm lake in the midst of a hurricane. "Dad," he said, "I'm here with Judge Sterling. He seems to think you failed to raise me properly. He's wondering where you are." A pause stretched, thick with tension. "He'd like to know if you could come down to courtroom 4B right now." Who, exactly, was on the other end of that line, holding the power to make a man like Judge Sterling tremble? Just hours earlier, the day had begun with promise. Marcus Vance, a prodigy of environmental science, walked into the Port City Federal Courthouse with his senior project cradled in his arms. It was a marvel of engineering, a portable, real-time water contamination analysis system he had designed and built himself. The metal detector shrieked the second he stepped through. A burly security guard, Officer Thorne, moved to intercept him, his eyes narrowing with immediate, unfounded suspicion. "Whoa there, what the hell is that contraption?" he grunted, his hand clamping down on the device before Marcus could even respond. "It's a water quality analysis unit, sir," Marcus explained, his tone polite but firm. "I have a presentation scheduled with the Environmental Review Board today." Thorne grunted again, turning the complex array of sensors and microprocessors over in his meaty hands with a shocking lack of care. "Looks like a bomb to me," he declared, his voice loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. Marcus fought to keep his own voice level. "I have all the documentation right here," he said, reaching for his backpack. "Hands where I can see 'em," Thorne bellowed, his hand instinctively moving toward the firearm on his hip. The lobby chatter died instantly. All eyes turned to the young black man and the suspicious contraption. Marcus froze, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. This was how it started. A misunderstanding, a prejudice, a quick slide into a nightmare. "Got a suspicious device here," Thorne barked into his shoulder radio. "Subject is uncooperative." 2 more guards materialized, flanking Marcus as if he were a hardened criminal. That's when he saw him. Near the grand marble staircase, Judge Arthur Sterling stood watching, arms crossed over his chest, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. He made no move to intervene, no attempt to de-escalate. He just watched, an emperor observing the gladiators. "I'm just here for my scheduled presentation," Marcus repeated, his voice strained, directing his words toward the judge. Judge Sterling strolled over, his gaze flicking from Marcus's face to the device with theatrical disgust. "Shouldn't you be in school, boy?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "I have an excused absence, Your Honor," Marcus said, forcing the honorific through clenched teeth. "I'm scheduled to present my findings to the Environmental Review Board." The judge scoffed. "The Environmental Board? In my courthouse?" Disbelief was caked onto every word. "Yes, sir. Room 302 at 11 a.m. Dr. Evans is expecting me." The judge glanced at his gold-plated watch. "We'll see about that," he muttered. "Take him to my courtroom first, and take that thing." The guards propelled Marcus forward, his meticulously constructed project now held hostage in Officer Thorne's grip. As they walked, Marcus watched in a daze as a procession of white men in suits with briefcases full of electronics and a white college student with a sprawling robotics project sailed through the same security checkpoint without so much as a second glance. He discreetly pulled out his phone and texted his father. "Delayed at courthouse security. Might be late for my presentation." The reply was instantaneous. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" Marcus began to type out the truth, then stopped. His father was in the middle of negotiating a national security treaty. He had enough on his plate, just some extra checks. No big deal. The lie felt like acid in his throat. Up ahead, Judge Sterling's voice drifted back, a low murmur to Officer Thorne. "These people always have an excuse. Needs to be taught a lesson about authority. He'll know his place by the time I'm done with him." Marcus's back went ramrod straight. A cold, clear anger burned away his fear. This was no longer about a science project. This was about something far older and far uglier. What did a man like Judge Sterling truly have to fear from a high school student's water analysis device? In the chilling silence of Judge Sterling's empty courtroom, Marcus stood before the towering judge's bench. His project, his passion, his future lay in pieces on the evidence table, disassembled with brutish carelessness. "Explain to me again," Judge Sterling began, not even bothering to look up from scrolling through his phone, "what this toy is supposed to do." The disrespect was a physical blow, but Marcus refused to stagger. "It's a portable water analysis system that measures heavy metal and carcinogen levels in municipal water supplies, Your Honor," he said, his voice ringing with a clarity he didn't feel. "I've spent the last year collecting data that demonstrates a direct correlation between contamination hotspots in low-income neighborhoods and clusters of specific cancers and autoimmune disorders." Judge Sterling casually tossed Marcus's meticulously prepared research papers onto the floor without a glance. "And what possesses you to bring this junk into my courthouse?" "The Environmental Review Board holds its monthly hearings here, sir. I was formally invited by Dr. Evans to present my findings." A message pinged on the judge's phone. "Ah, yes, Dr. Evans," Sterling said, a thin smile playing on his lips. He confirms a meeting is scheduled, but he says nothing about a student presenter. The floor dropped out from under Marcus's feet. His stomach twisted into a knot of ice. But the confirmation email was sent to all board members 2 weeks ago. My name was on it. The judge finally looked up, his eyes like chips of flint. Are you presuming to tell me how to manage the affairs of my own courthouse, boy? The words were low, a predator's growl. No, sir, I am simply providing the relevant information. Judge Sterling rose to his full height, a looming black-robed specter of authority. He descended from the bench and circled Marcus slowly, like a shark sizing up its prey. Let me tell you something, he hissed, his face uncomfortably close. I have sat on this bench for 25 years. I have heard every lie, every sob story, every pathetic excuse you can possibly imagine. I understand that, Your Honor, but no interruptions. His hand slammed down on the evidence table with a deafening crack. The scattered components of Marcus's project jumped. A delicate, custom-calibrated sensor skittered across the table and crashed to the marble floor, shattering into a dozen pieces. Marcus watched a year of his life, hundreds of hours of painstaking work, break apart in an instant. His breath hitched. Sir, that's irreplaceable. That's a year of research. Research? Judge Sterling let out a hollow, mocking laugh. Is that what your kind calls it these days? Where did you get the parts for this thing? Who really built it for you? The accusations were a cascade of poison. I designed and built it myself, Marcus said, his voice shaking with a rage he was struggling to contain. The parts were purchased with a grant from the National Science Foundation. The judge's jaw tightened, a muscle pulsing in his cheek. A likely story, he spat. Let me be perfectly clear. This federal courthouse is not your high school science fair. He picked up a complex circuit board, examining it with the exaggerated suspicion of a bad actor. This equipment could pose a serious threat. It could interfere with our courthouse security systems. He dropped the board back on the table with a clatter. We're holding this device for a full security inspection. You can wait in the hallway. If, and only if, the board confirms your little story, you can have your property back. Judge Sterling's smile was a gash in his face, devoid of all warmth, all humanity. Maybe. Eventually. Marcus stared at the wreckage of his project. That device held the data, the proof, the undeniable evidence of environmental injustice being perpetrated on his own community. It was more than just a project. It was their voice. May I have a receipt for my confiscated property, Your Honor? The question was quiet, but it landed with the force of a thrown stone. The judge's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Getting some legal advice from your street corner lawyers, are we? The question hung in the air, a threat and a promise. Would Marcus's year of work, the evidence of a silent poison seeping into his community, be utterly destroyed before he could even speak its truth? Marcus stood in the marble hallway, a ghost in a place of power, watching the minutes on the wall clock tick away with excruciating slowness. His presentation was scheduled to begin, but a guard stood posted outside room 302, under strict orders from Judge Sterling not to let him near it. Suddenly, a familiar voice called his name. Marcus, there you are. We're starting in 15 minutes. Why aren't you setting up? Dr. Evans, a kind, gray-haired scientist with a perpetually worried expression, hurried toward him. The relief Marcus felt was so potent it almost buckled his knees. Dr. Evans, Judge Sterling confiscated my project. He said it was a security risk. Dr. Evans's eyebrows shot toward his hairline. That's preposterous. You are our keynote presenter. Your research is the entire reason for this special session. They went back to the courtroom together, a united front. The judge was on the phone, laughing at some private joke. He held up a single imperious finger, forcing them to wait. Marcus noticed the subtle shift in the judge's demeanor when he saw Dr. Evans. He stood a little straighter. His voice became more formal. He was a performer, and he had just changed his audience. When the call finally ended, Dr. Evans stepped forward. "Judge Sterling, there has been a grave misunderstanding. Marcus Vance is our invited guest and keynote presenter today." The judge offered a cursory glance. This young man attempted to bring an unauthorized and unvetted electronic device into a federal building. It is now subject to a thorough investigation. "It's a water analysis unit that I have personally vetted and approved," Dr. Evans insisted, his voice rising in frustration. Judge Sterling's eyes narrowed. "Did you run a full background check on him? On his family? Do you have any idea where he's from?" The questions were rapid fire, designed to intimidate, to insinuate. Marcus felt a hot flush of shame and anger creep up his neck. He saw Dr. Evans shift uncomfortably. "He's one of the most brilliant students I have ever had the privilege of teaching." "That doesn't answer my question," Sterling snapped. He turned his cold gaze back to Marcus. "Where, exactly, are you from, Mr. Vance?" "I was born in Atlanta, sir. My family moved to Port City 5 years ago." "And before Atlanta?" The question was bizarre, nonsensical. Marcus blinked. "My family has lived in Georgia for over 200 years, sir." Judge Sterling made a dismissive sound in the back of his throat. "Your project will remain confiscated until the proper federal authorities can inspect it. However," he nodded curtly at Dr. Evans, "you may take personal responsibility for him, and he may attend the meeting. Without his device, of course." "But his entire presentation is on the device," Dr. Evans protested. "All his data, his slides, his models." "Then perhaps he should have been more thoughtful before bringing suspicious equipment into my courthouse," the judge said, his voice rising, enjoying the display of his own power. "Consider it a valuable life lesson in planning ahead. Perhaps you'd like to go explain to the board why your chosen speaker is unprepared." Marcus's hands balled into fists at his sides, his nails digging into his palms. "Your Honor, may I at least retrieve my presentation slides? They're on the laptop in the case." Judge Sterling smiled that razor-thin smile again. "The same laptop we are holding for inspection? I think not." Dr. Evans checked his watch, his face pale with stress. "We have to go. The board has a very tight schedule." "Then run along," the judge said with a final dismissive wave. "And Mr. Vance," he called out as they reached the door, "next time, learn your place before you walk into my courthouse." Marcus followed Dr. Evans down the hall, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The humiliation was a physical burn. They entered the conference room. A dozen board members sat around a long, polished table. Observers and aides lined the walls. Every single head turned as they entered. The weight of their collective expectation felt like a physical force, pressing down, threatening to crush him. "My apologies for the delay," Dr. Evans announced, his voice tight. "We've encountered an unexpected logistical issue." Marcus stepped forward, his legs feeling like lead. He could feel their stares, their judgment, their pity. He took a deep, shuddering breath and found his voice. "I apologize," he began, the words steady and clear. A small miracle. "My research project and all of my presentation materials have been confiscated by Judge Sterling." A wave of whispers rippled through the room. He saw a woman in the back row shake her head and scribble something in her notebook. He was a failure before he had even begun. How in God's name was he going to salvage this? Marcus stood before the Environmental Review Board, empty-handed and exposed. He felt the phantom weight of his project in his arms, the familiar click of the keyboard under his fingers. He had nothing. He closed his eyes for a single second, picturing the charts, the graphs, the molecules. He took a deep breath and began to speak from the only place he had left: his memory. My project measures concentrations of hexavalent chromium, lead, and perfluorooctanoic acid in the municipal water supply of Port City's 5 districts, he began. His voice, shaky at first, grew stronger with every word, fueled by a righteous anger. Over the course of 12 months, I took bi-weekly samples. The data I documented showed contamination levels in the predominantly minority communities of Districts 4 and 5 that were, on average, 500% higher than in the affluent, predominantly white communities of Districts 1 and 2. Despite the total absence of visual aids, the board members leaned forward, captivated. Marcus, running on pure adrenaline, grabbed a marker and began sketching on a nearby whiteboard. He drew the chemical structures of the carcinogens, mapped out the city's aging water pipe infrastructure, and illustrated his sample collection methodology and the statistical controls he'd used to ensure accuracy. I then cross-referenced my contamination data with public health records, he continued, his marker flying across the board. I identified a direct, statistically undeniable correlation between the pollution spikes and localized outbreaks of childhood leukemia, kidney disease, and severe autoimmune disorders. He drew another diagram, a horrifying overlay of a contamination map and a disease cluster map. They were nearly identical. The data demonstrates that our environmental protection laws are not being enforced equitably. It is a systemic failure, and it is poisoning our citizens based on their zip code. Dr. Evans watched, his initial panic melting into a quiet, profound pride. He was witnessing not a disaster, but a triumph of intellect and will over circumstance. When Marcus finally finished, a stunned silence hung in the room for a moment before it was broken by a wave of applause. "That was remarkable work, Mr. Vance," said the committee chair, Dr. Lawson, "especially given the circumstances. Where did you say your project is now?" "Judge Sterling is holding it for security inspection," Marcus answered, choosing his words with care. Dr. Lawson frowned, a deep crease forming between her brows. "That is highly irregular. We will be making inquiries. In the meantime, your findings are too important to be silenced. Would you consider presenting this at the national conference in Boston next month?" Marcus nodded, a wave of dizzying relief washing over him. "I would be honored, ma'am." As the meeting adjourned, Marcus excused himself. He found an empty restroom, locked himself in a stall, and leaned his forehead against the cool metal of the door. The adrenaline crash hit him like a physical blow. His entire body trembled. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking so badly he could barely dial. He called his father. It went straight to voicemail. "Dad," he said, his voice cracking. Something happened at the courthouse today. This Judge Sterling, he took my project." He paused, swallowing hard, refusing to sound like he was complaining, like he couldn't handle it. "I think the presentation went okay, but I could really use your advice. Call me when you get this." He hung up and took a few deep breaths, forcing the tremors to subside. Dr. Evans was waiting outside. "Marcus, you were incredible," he said, his eyes shining. "I have never in my life seen such poise under that kind of pressure." "Thank you, sir. Do you think there's any chance I can get my project back today?" Dr. Evans' expression hardened. "Let's go find out." They returned to Judge Sterling's courtroom. He was in the middle of a hearing. He saw them enter, his eyes flashing with annoyance, but he deliberately ignored them, forcing them to wait. Marcus sat in the back row, observing. The patterns were sickeningly clear. A well-dressed white executive accused of embezzlement received patient, respectful questioning. A young Latino man accused of shoplifting was met with a barrage of rapid-fire interruptions and open contempt. An hour later, The courtroom finally cleared. Judge Sterling beckoned them forward. "Still here, Mr. Vance?" "Yes, Your Honor. I've completed my presentation. I would like to collect my property now." "That will not be possible," the judge said flatly. "Our federal security team needs to complete their full inspection." Dr. Evans stepped in. "Judge, with all due respect, that equipment contains a year's worth of irreplaceable scientific data." "He should have thought of that before he brought an unauthorized, potentially dangerous device into a federal building," Sterling retorted, his voice cold. Marcus met the judge's hard gaze, refusing to look away. "When can I expect to have it returned, sir?" "When we are fully satisfied that it poses no threat," the judge said with a dismissive shrug. "Could be days, could be weeks, could be never." Marcus felt something shift inside him. A line had been crossed. This was no longer just an injustice. It was a declaration of war. He made a silent vow, his face a mask of perfect composure. He thanked the judge politely, turned on his heel, and walked out of the courtroom with his head held high. Once he was clear of the courthouse doors, he made another call, this time to a different number. A voice answered immediately. "Uncle Ben, it's Marcus. I need some legal advice about unlawful property confiscation in a federal building." His uncle's calm, steady voice came through the line. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." Who was Uncle Ben, and what kind of legal storm was he about to unleash? The next morning at school, Marcus moved through the crowded hallways like a phantom, his mind a million miles away, replaying every infuriating detail of his encounter with Judge Sterling. His chemistry teacher, Ms. Albright, a sharp woman who missed nothing, pulled him aside after the bell. "Marcus, what happened yesterday? Dr. Evans called me. He was incandescent with rage." Marcus explained the entire situation, sticking to the cold, hard facts, carefully editing out the raw emotion that was churning in his gut. Ms. Albright's expression grew darker with every word. "That's not just irregular, Marcus, that's illegal. Judge Sterling had no legal grounds to confiscate your property without probable cause. Have you told your father?" "I left him messages," Marcus said. "He's at a summit in Geneva all week." "Well, don't you dare give up," she said, her hand on his shoulder. "The district science fair is next week. The review board still expects you to enter." Marcus nodded, the thought filling him with a fresh wave of despair. "I'll have to rebuild the entire thing from scratch." During lunch, his phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. The message was short and chilling. "Your project is on the disposal docket for tomorrow morning. 800. Standard security protocol for unvetted devices. A friend at the courthouse." "A friend?" Marcus's blood ran cold. Disposal. They were going to destroy it. A year of his life, the data that could save his community was going to be thrown away like trash. He tried his father's number again. Straight to the encrypted voicemail. Panic began to claw at the edges of his carefully constructed composure. After his last class, he raced back to the courthouse. A different guard was at the security desk. "I need to speak with Judge Sterling immediately," Marcus said, his voice tight with urgency. "The judge has already left for the day," the guard replied, not looking up from his magazine. "You can come back during business hours tomorrow." "It can't wait until tomorrow. My property is scheduled to be destroyed in the morning." The guard shrugged, a picture of bureaucratic indifference. "Nothing I can do about it." Then, down the long marble corridor, Marcus spotted a familiar, hated figure. Officer Thorne. "Officer Thorne!" he called out, striding toward him. "A moment of your time, please." Thorne turned, his face twisting into a sneer when he saw Marcus. "What is it now, kid?" "My project. The one you confiscated yesterday. It's on the disposal docket for tomorrow morning. It contains irreplaceable scientific research data." "Judge's orders," Thorne said with a smirk. Maybe next time you'll think twice before bringing your little toys where they don't belong. Can I at least recover the data drive? Marcus pleaded, desperation creeping into his voice. It's a small blue flash drive. It's all I'm asking. No unauthorized personnel are allowed access to items and secured evidence, Thorne recited, turning his back. Learn your lesson, kid. Move on. Marcus stumbled back outside, the courthouse doors closing behind him with a heavy thud. The frustration was a physical thing, a pressure building in his chest until he felt like he couldn't breathe. He called his uncle again. They're destroying it tomorrow morning, Uncle Ben. I can't reach Dad. His uncle's voice was grim but steady. Document everything, Marcus. Every name, every time, every word that was said. I'm making some calls right now. That evening, in the cluttered sanctuary of his family's garage, Marcus worked with a feverish intensity, surrounded by spare parts and schematics, trying to recreate his masterpiece from memory. His mother stood in the doorway, her face etched with worry. Marcus, honey, sometimes a fight just isn't worth it. This one is, Mom, he said, not looking up from the delicate task of soldering a connection. This isn't just about my project anymore. Then what is it about? She asked softly. Marcus paused, carefully connecting two wires. He looked at the half-finished device, a pale imitation of his original. When Judge Sterling took my project, he said, his voice low and heavy with a terrible new understanding, he wasn't just taking a piece of equipment. He was trying to silence the data. The data that proves his own courthouse is located in the very district with the most egregious, long-standing water quality violations in the entire city. His mother's eyes widened in horror. You think he's doing this on purpose? I don't know for sure, Marcus said, his hands steadying as a cold resolve settled over him. But I'm damn well going to find out. What kind of calls was Uncle Ben making? And would they be enough to stop the ticking clock? As the first gray light of dawn crept over Port City, Marcus was already there, waiting on the cold stone steps of the federal courthouse. He wasn't a student anymore. He was a petitioner, a plaintiff. In his hands, he held a sheaf of documents. His uncle, a senior partner at a top civil rights law firm, had helped him prepare overnight. Notarized proof of ownership, copies of the grant from the National Science Foundation, the official invitation from the Environmental Review Board. When Judge Sterling's black town car pulled up, a flicker of genuine surprise, quickly masked by annoyance, crossed the judge's face. Mr. Vance, you are certainly persistent, aren't you? Yes, sir, Marcus replied, standing his ground. I have documentation here proving my project's scientific purpose and legitimacy, and a formal legal request for its immediate return. Judge Sterling barely glanced at the papers Marcus held out. File it with the clerk's office. I have a full docket this morning. He tried to brush past, but Marcus took a half step to the side, blocking his path, his posture respectful but unyielding. Sir, with all due respect, courthouse security is scheduled to dispose of my property this morning at 8 a.m. That's not my department, the judge snapped, his patience wearing thin. Marcus held his gaze. Your Honor, I have documented every interaction, every conversation, and every refusal to comply with legal standards since yesterday morning. If my property is destroyed without due process of law, I will have no choice but to escalate this matter legally and publicly. The judge's eyes narrowed to venomous slits. Are you threatening me, young man? No, sir. I am informing you of my rights as a citizen. The judge stepped closer, invading Marcus's personal space, his voice a low, menacing whisper. Let me make something crystal clear to you. In this building you have no power. I am the power here. I decide what happens in my courthouse. This courthouse belongs to the people of this city, Your Honor, Marcus said, his own voice quiet but unwavering. A dark flush crept up Judge Sterling's neck. You need a lesson in respect. Officer Thorne. Thorne appeared from the security entrance as if on cue. Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Vance here is creating a public disturbance. Please escort him from the premises. I am standing on public property, and I am in possession of legal documentation, Marcus stated calmly. The judge pointed a trembling finger at the papers in Marcus's hand. Those documents look fraudulent to me. Confiscate them as evidence. Thorne hesitated for a split second, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Sir, you heard my order. Those papers could be part of a larger scheme. Confiscate them now. Marcus held the documents tighter. These are notarized copies of my grant award and property deeds, sir. Judge Sterling leaned in close, his breath hot and sour. You think you're so smart, don't you? You think your little papers are going to save you? Here, you are nothing. Remember that. Just then, a courthouse administrator hurried out onto the steps, her face pale. Judge Sterling, there's a phone call for you. They say it's a matter of national importance. The judge's head snapped around. He took a step back from Marcus, his mask of authority momentarily slipping. This isn't over, he hissed, before following the administrator back inside. Marcus waited until they were gone, then turned to Officer Thorne, whose bravado seemed to have evaporated. I just want my project back before they destroy it. Thorne looked deeply uncomfortable. He glanced around the empty plaza, then lowered his voice. Look, kid, just drop this. You're poking a bear. For your own good. Why are you following his illegal orders? Marcus asked, his voice raw with frustration. Thorne's gaze darted around nervously. Look, I've got 2 years left until I get my full pension. Don't make this any harder than it has to be. Is your pension worth more than destroying the evidence of a city-sanctioned poisoning? Marcus asked quietly. Officer Thorne had no answer, but the shame on his face spoke volumes. Who was on the other end of that urgent phone call, and what fresh hell was about to break loose? That afternoon, Marcus sat on a hard wooden bench outside Judge Sterling's courtroom, a silent, solitary protester. He refused to leave until someone, anyone, addressed his claim. Lawyers and clerks hurried past, some casting curious glances, others ignoring him completely. One of them, a woman in her late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, stopped. You've been sitting here all day, she stated, not unkindly. Is this court business? I'm trying to recover my confiscated property before it's illegally destroyed, Marcus said. She sat down next to him. I'm Laura Chen, Public Defender's Office. Tell me about this property. Marcus laid out the entire story, from the moment he walked into the courthouse to the confrontation that morning, showing her the duplicate set of documents his uncle had insisted he make. When he finished, she slowly shook her head. Judge Sterling. Of course, he has a reputation for this kind of judicial overreach. Let me make a call. While she stepped away, her voice a low, urgent murmur on her phone, Marcus checked his own. Still nothing from his father. But there was a new text from Uncle Ben. It simply said, Hold the line. Help is on the way. Laura returned, her face grim. I just spoke with a friend in court administration. Your project was already moved to the disposal unit in the sub-basement. We might be able to stop it, but we have to move right now. They practically ran to the elevators, descending into the bowels of the courthouse. In the sub-basement, a hulking security officer blocked the entrance to the disposal room. Authorized personnel only, he grunted, refusing them entry. This young man's property is being illegally disposed of without a court order, Laura argued, her lawyer's voice sharp and commanding. I have my orders, ma'am, the officer replied, unmoved. Through the small, wire-reinforced window in the door, Marcus saw it. His project, his beautiful, intricate creation lay on a steel table, waiting for destruction. "That's it! It's right there!" he cried, pressing against the glass. "Please, that's a year of environmental research. People's lives depend on that data." The officer physically blocked his view. "Step away from the door, sir, or I'll have you removed from the building." Laura pulled Marcus back. "It's no use. We need a judge's order. A different judge. Let me go file an emergency stay." But as they turned to leave, the elevator doors hissed open, and Judge Sterling emerged, a look of smug triumph on his face. "Well, well, Ms. Chen. Slumming it with the troublemakers today, are we?" "Your Honor, this young man's property is being improperly destroyed. I am on my way to file for an emergency stay of disposal." Judge Sterling laughed, a sound utterly devoid of humor. "Save yourself the paperwork. That device was personally deemed a security risk by me." "Based on what evidence?" Laura challenged, her eyes flashing. "My courtroom, my rules, my decision," the judge said. He gestured to the guard. "Please escort Ms. Chen and Mr. Vance out of the building, and Mr. Vance is now officially banned from these premises." Marcus stepped forward, his body thrumming with a righteous fury he could no longer contain. "Sir, I have been nothing but respectful. I have followed every single rule. Why are you doing this?" Judge Sterling stared at him, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated contempt. "Because I can," he said softly, "and because some people need to be taught their place in the natural order of things." Laura gripped Marcus's arm, her fingers digging into his bicep. "Don't," she whispered urgently. "Don't engage him. We'll find another way." As the guard escorted them away, Marcus looked back over his shoulder. He saw Judge Sterling enter the disposal room, and through the closing door, he saw the judge pick up a heavy ball-peen hammer from a tool rack. "My God," Marcus whispered, the horror dawning on him. "He's going to destroy it himself." Laura's expression hardened into one of cold fury. "Okay, now we know this is personal. Time to call in the big guns." With his life's work just seconds away from being smashed to pieces, what possible recourse did Marcus have left? He was about to lose everything. What would you do in this moment? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're feeling Marcus's frustration, hit that like button to show your support. Outside on the courthouse steps, Marcus paced like a caged animal, his heart pounding with a sickening rhythm of hope and despair. Laura was on her phone, making frantic calls, trying to find another judge, any judge, who would issue an emergency intervention. "It's no good," she finally admitted, her voice laced with frustration. "No one is available on such short notice, and frankly, most of them are terrified of crossing Judge Sterling." Just then, Marcus's phone rang. The screen displayed a satellite number he didn't recognize, but he knew who it was. It was his father. Dad, you have to help me. They're destroying my project right now as we speak." "I know, son," a calm, authoritative voice replied. "I've been briefed. Put me on speaker." Confused, Marcus complied. Laura watched, her expression a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "This is David Vance." His father's powerful voice filled the air around them. "To whom am I speaking?" "Laura Chen, sir, Public Defender's Office. Your son's property is being destroyed by Judge Sterling himself." "I understand, Miss Chen. Please do me a favor. Escort my son back inside. Insist on seeing Judge Sterling at once. If you meet any resistance from security, tell them to call this number immediately." He recited a secure extension number at the Pentagon. Laura's eyes widened, but she nodded. "We'll try, Mr. Vance." They walked back into the courthouse, two soldiers marching toward an uncertain battle. At the security checkpoint, they were immediately stopped. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but this individual has been banned from the premises," the guard said flatly. Laura stood her ground. "We need to see Judge Harmon on an urgent matter. If you refuse us entry, please call this number." She held out her phone with the number displayed. The guard hesitated, then reluctantly made the call. His posture changed instantly. His eyes went wide. He began stammering. "Yes, sir. Of course, sir. Right away, sir." He hung up the phone, his face suddenly slick with sweat. He looked at Marcus with a new, terrified respect. You can proceed to Judge Sterling's chambers." As they walked down the now silent corridor, Marcus whispered, "What in the world just happened?" Laura shook her head, her mind reeling. "Who exactly is your father, Marcus?" He works for the Department of Justice," Marcus said, the half-truth feeling inadequate. "That's all I really know." They reached the judge's chambers. A clerk tried to block their path, but the mere mention of the phone number sent him scurrying inside. He returned moments later, his face ashen. The judge will see you now." They stepped inside. Judge Sterling was standing behind his magnificent oak desk. In front of him lay Marcus's project, dented and scarred, but still in one piece. The ball-peen hammer sat beside it. "This is harassment," the judge began, his voice trembling with rage. "I have made my final decision regarding this device." Laura stepped forward. "Your Honor, we have been instructed to call this number if you refuse to return Mr. Taylor's property immediately and in its current condition." She held up the phone again. Judge Sterling scoffed. "I am not concerned with some bureaucratic paper pusher at the DOJ." "Then perhaps you should make the call yourself," Marcus suggested, his voice quiet and dangerously calm. Something in Marcus's newfound confidence, in his unnerving stillness, gave the judge pause. He snatched the phone and reluctantly dialed. "This is Judge Arthur Sterling of the United States District Court. To whom am I speaking?" His expression shifted, a rapid-fire sequence of annoyance to confusion to pure, unadulterated shock. Yes, I understand. But the device was deemed—" "Yes, sir." The color drained completely from Judge Sterling's face. He looked as if he'd seen a ghost. He handed the phone back to Laura, his hand shaking violently. Your property will be returned to you immediately, Mr. Vance," he stammered. "In its original, undamaged condition, with all data drives intact," Marcus specified, pressing his advantage. Judge Sterling nodded mutely, unable to meet the young man's eyes. As they were packing the damaged project back into its case, Marcus's phone rang again. He answered, putting it on speaker. "Is the situation resolved, son?" his father asked. "Yes, Dad." "It is. Thank you." "Good. Now do me a favor. Put Judge Sterling on the line. I'm flying into Port City tomorrow morning, and I'd like to have a personal meeting with him." Laura stared at Marcus, the final pieces of the puzzle clicking into place in her mind with the force of a shotgun blast. "Your father is—" Judge Sterling, looking pale and shrunken, approached them. "Judge Sterling," Marcus said, his voice devoid of triumph, only a weary resolution. "My father would like a word with you." He handed over the phone. The judge took it like it was a venomous snake. "This is Judge Sterling." And from the phone came a voice that was calm, clear, and carried the full crushing weight of the United States government. "Judge Sterling, this is United States Attorney General David Vance. I will be in your courthouse tomorrow at 0900 hours to discuss your treatment of my son and what appears to be a deeply disturbing pattern of judicial misconduct in your courtroom. Please clear your docket." Judge Sterling nearly dropped the phone. His face was a mask of sheer terror. Yes, Mr. Attorney General, of course. I'll make the arrangements." He handed the phone back to Marcus and practically fled into the safety of his chambers, slamming the door behind him. In the hallway, Laura let out a long, low whistle. Your father is the Attorney General of the United States. Marcus nodded grimly. He was confirmed 6 months ago. We try to keep it quiet. No wonder Sterling looked like he was about to have a heart attack, she breathed. She looked down at the project. So this is really about water contamination? Yes, Marcus said, running a hand over a deep scratch in the casing. A year of data that proves our environmental protection laws aren't being enforced in the poorest neighborhoods. He paused, a new horrifying thought dawning. The data also shows that the highest contamination rates correspond exactly with the districts where Judge Sterling has his highest and harshest sentencing rates. Laura's eyes widened. Marcus, you didn't just find evidence of environmental racism. You may have stumbled upon the proof of systemic judicial bias. I just wanted to help my community get clean water, Marcus said, carefully lifting his wounded project. I never ever expected to expose a corrupt federal judge. How would a man like Judge Sterling possibly survive a face-to-face meeting with the most powerful lawyer in the country? Dawn had barely broken, but the sky over Port City was already swarming with news helicopters. An army of satellite trucks surrounded the federal courthouse. An anonymous tip had leaked. The Attorney General of the United States was making an unscheduled, unannounced visit. Inside his chambers, Judge Sterling paced like a caged wolf, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice a desperate, wheezing whisper. Senator, you gave me your word. You promised me protection. A pause. Yes, I've always ruled in favor of your corporate interests. But this is the Attorney General. I understand politics, but this is my entire career, my life. He slammed the phone down with a cry of pure anguish. His clerk entered, his face the color of ash. Sir, there are FBI agents in the lobby. FBI? Sterling choked out. Vance isn't wasting a single second. He collapsed into his chair, a broken man. Meanwhile, Marcus and his father arrived at a private rear entrance, flanked by a security detail of grim-faced FBI agents. David Vance was tall and impeccably dressed, but he had the same calm, steady eyes as his son. Are you okay, Marcus? He asked, his voice low and full of a concern that cut through his official demeanor. I'm better now, Marcus replied. I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't mean for it to become all this. You have nothing to be sorry for. You stood your ground against a bully, and you did it with integrity. I have never been more proud of you, his father said, squeezing his shoulder. But you're right. This isn't just about your science project anymore. They entered a secure conference room where Laura Chen was waiting with a team of Justice Department officials. The walls were covered with massive maps of Port City, with entire neighborhoods highlighted in angry red. Ms. Chen has been an invaluable asset, sir, an aide told the Attorney General. She's already compiled a substantial preliminary file on Judge Sterling's pattern of discriminatory rulings. Laura nodded. Sir, it correlates almost perfectly with your son's water contamination research. The neighborhoods with the worst environmental protections and the highest rates of disease are the exact same neighborhoods where Judge Sterling's rulings have been demonstrably more severe against minority defendants. David Vance studied the maps, his expression hardening. And these red zones also correlate perfectly with Senator Whitfield's real estate development investments. Another aide confirmed it. The senator's network of shell companies has been systematically buying up undervalued properties in these areas for years, often after environmental regulations were conveniently and selectively unenforced. Marcus looked at his damaged project, the pieces finally clicking into place. That's why he was so desperate to destroy it, he said, the realization hitting him. My research is the key. It's the physical evidence that connects the environmental crimes to the judicial corruption. His father turned to him. You stumbled onto a criminal conspiracy, son, One bigger and darker than either of us could have imagined. Your environmental justice project has exposed actual systemic injustice. A sharp knock came at the door. Judge Sterling entered, flanked by a high-priced lawyer. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. "Attorney General Vance," the judge began, his voice strained. This theatrical display is hardly necessary. This is all just a simple misunderstanding about a high school science project." David Vance didn't move, didn't offer his hand. "This meeting isn't about my son's project, Judge," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Though that incident, your appalling abuse of power, was the thread that allowed us to start unraveling a very disturbing pattern. Please, sit." For the next hour, the Justice Department lawyers laid out the case, piece by damning piece. They presented evidence of Sterling's discriminatory sentencing patterns, his selective dismissal of environmental lawsuits, and his deep financial and political connections to Senator Whitfield's business empire. Charts and graphs told the story with brutal, undeniable clarity. In the neighborhoods Marcus's project had identified as contamination hotspots, defendants in Sterling's courtroom received sentences that were, on average, 40% longer than for identical crimes committed in other neighborhoods. Phone records showed dozens of calls between Judge Sterling's chambers and Senator Whitfield's office, often just minutes before the judge would issue a key ruling that directly benefited the senator's development companies. "This is a politically motivated witch hunt," Judge Sterling finally exploded, his face slick with sweat. "I have served on this bench with distinction for 25 years. "Yes, you have," the Attorney General replied evenly. "And in the last 12 hours, my team has reviewed all 25 years of your rulings. Would you care to explain this 40% sentencing disparity, Judge?" Sterling looked to his lawyer, who suddenly seemed fascinated by a spot on the carpet. "Or perhaps," David Vance continued, "you can explain the nature of your phone calls with Senator Whitfield's office immediately preceding your dismissal of the clean water lawsuit filed by the citizens of District 4? The judge's face went slack, the color of dirty snow. I want immunity," he whispered. His lawyer jumped to his feet. "My client will not be making any further statements at this time." The Attorney General nodded to an aide, who slid a document across the table. "Judge Sterling, this is a formal notice of a federal investigation by the Department of Justice. As of this moment, you are being placed on indefinite administrative leave, pending its completion." "You can't do this," Sterling whimpered. "I am not doing this," David Vance said, standing to his full height. "Your own actions have done this. The Judicial Ethics Committee is convening an emergency session this afternoon. I suggest you prepare your defense." As Judge Sterling and his lawyer were escorted from the room, David turned to his son. "Your project uncovered something we've suspected for years, but could never definitively prove. Environmental injustice and judicial corruption are two heads of the same monster." Marcus looked at the scarred casing of his project. "I just wanted my neighborhood to have clean water." "And you will," his father assured him. "Your data is now the cornerstone of a federal environmental justice investigation." Laura approached Marcus, a rare, genuine smile on her face. "The Environmental Review Board just called. They want you to give your full presentation tomorrow, with a full Justice Department security detail this time." By evening, the news of Judge Sterling's suspension was the lead story on every channel. Sources confirmed the federal investigation began after the judge attempted to illegally confiscate and destroy scientific evidence collected by a local high school student, a reporter announced. The evidence allegedly proved that environmental protection laws were being selectively and illegally enforced in minority neighborhoods. At home, Marcus watched the coverage with his parents. His mother turned to her husband. "David, how big is this going to get?" "Very big," he replied grimly. Senator Whitfield and his cronies have been using these neighborhoods as their personal dumping grounds for years, buying up the land for pennies on the dollar after their own companies contaminated it, then getting their pet judge to block any attempts at cleanup. "But why go after Marcus's project so viciously?" she asked. "Because data doesn't have a political opinion," Marcus answered, his voice quiet. "My water quality measurements created a map that matched perfectly with Judge Sterling's discriminatory sentencing patterns. It was the missing link. It connected the environmental racism directly to the judicial misconduct." The Attorney General's phone rang. He listened for a moment, his expression hardening. "Senator Whitfield is on television, calling for an investigation into our investigation. He's claiming the whole thing is politically motivated." "Is it?" Marcus asked. "Justice isn't political, son," his father said, his eyes like steel. "But the people who try to obstruct it always hide behind politics." The next morning, Marcus presented his findings to the Environmental Review Board. This time, his project was fully repaired and operational. This time, FBI agents stood discreetly at the back of the room. "These water quality readings, taken over 12 months, show a clear and undeniable pattern," Marcus explained, his data displayed on a huge screen behind him. "Environmental violations are reported equally across all 5 city districts, but enforcement actions and cleanup funds are concentrated almost exclusively in the 2 most affluent districts." The board members, now understanding the full, explosive significance of his research, looked at the data with new eyes. "This data will be absolutely essential to the federal investigation," Dr. Lawson announced. "Mr. Vance, the board has voted unanimously to fund a massive expansion of your water monitoring system to cover the entire city." As they left the meeting, Laura Chen met them in the hallway. "Judge Sterling's lawyer just called," she said. "He wants to make a deal." The Attorney General raised an eyebrow. "Already? He must realize we have far more than we've shown." "The dominoes are starting to fall," Laura confirmed. 3 other federal judges with similar ruling patterns have suddenly requested indefinite leaves of absence, and Senator Whitfield's primary development company saw its stock price drop by 30% this morning. Marcus listened to all this, a quiet observer in the storm he had created. His simple science project had triggered a catastrophic cascade of accountability. "What happens now?" he asked his father. "Justice," David Vance answered simply. "And, with any luck, clean water for your neighborhood." With Judge Sterling ready to sing, who else was about to be dragged into the light? 1 week later, the Judicial Ethics Committee hearing was a media circus. The room was packed to overflowing with lawyers, reporters, and activists. Judge Sterling sat at the defense table, looking shrunken and pathetic without the godlike authority of his black robes. At the back of the room, Senator Whitfield was surrounded by a phalanx of nervous advisors, whispering urgently into his ear. The moment Attorney General David Vance entered the room with his son, the senator slipped out a side door. The committee chair called the hearing to order. "We are here today to review substantial evidence of judicial misconduct by Judge Arthur Sterling, including but not limited to discriminatory sentencing patterns, improper dismissal of environmental cases, and potential corruption involving private development interests and elected officials." Marcus's research was the first piece of evidence presented. His rebuilt project stood on a table, a silent, powerful witness. On massive screens, the committee was shown the clear, damning correlations between water contamination, dismissed environmental lawsuits, and public health disasters in the city's different neighborhoods. This data, initially collected for a high school science fair, revealed a pattern of systemic negligence and corruption, the presenter explained. Environmental protection cases originating from minority neighborhoods were dismissed by Judge Sterling at a rate 8 times higher than identical cases from affluent areas. Sterling's attorney leapt to his feet. "Objection. A high school student's science project hardly constitutes admissible evidence in a federal hearing." The committee chair stared him down. The methodology has been independently verified and praised by environmental science departments at 3 separate universities. The data is sound. The data stands. Next, Justice Department investigators presented a mountain of evidence: phone records, bank transactions, emails, and a statistical analysis of 25 years of rulings that painted an undeniable picture. Judge Sterling had systematically ruled in favor of development interests connected to Senator Whitfield, allowing them to poison entire communities with impunity. During a short recess, Marcus overheard 2 committee members talking in the hallway. "The pattern is it's irrefutable," one said. "But will they really go through with it? Will they actually remove a sitting federal judge?" "They have to," the other replied, his voice grim. "It's too public now. That kid and his science project blew the lid off the whole damn thing." When the hearing resumed, Judge Sterling himself took the stand. His arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, self-serving pragmatism. "I acknowledge that some of my rulings may, in retrospect, show certain statistical disparities," he admitted, his words chosen with surgical precision. "But there was never any malicious intent to discriminate." The questioning was relentless. Justice Department lawyers presented case after case where identical crimes led to wildly different sentences, the only variable being the defendant's zip code and race. "And what about your frequent and lengthy communications with Senator Whitfield's office, often just moments before you issued key environmental rulings?" a committee member asked. Judge Sterling hesitated for a fatal second too long. "The senator is an old friend. We discussed many matters of public interest, including which environmental lawsuits to dismiss in order to facilitate his real estate development projects." The judge's lawyer shot to his feet. "My client wishes to amend his previous testimony." A low murmur swept through the room. Everyone knew what was coming. Judge Sterling leaned toward the microphone, his face a mask of defeat. "I am willing to provide a full and complete statement about Senator Whitfield's direct involvement in exchange for prosecutorial consideration in my own case." The committee chair glanced at David Vance, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "This hearing will recess while Judge Sterling provides his formal statement to officials from the Department of Justice." As the room began to empty, Marcus walked over to his father. "He's turning on the senator." "When powerful men fall, son, they rarely fall alone," David replied. "Sterling knows his career is over. Now he's just negotiating the terms of his surrender." Outside the hearing room, a swarm of reporters descended. Marcus stayed back as his father stepped up to the microphones. "Today marks a critical step forward for environmental justice in this country," the Attorney General declared. "When we allow our environmental laws to be selectively enforced, we are making a conscious decision about whose children deserve to breathe clean air and whose do not. That is morally bankrupt, and it is unacceptable in the United States of America." From across the lobby, Marcus saw Judge Sterling being escorted to a private room by FBI agents. His shoulders were slumped, the immense weight of his crimes finally visible. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met. The judge looked away first. Later that evening, the news broke like a thunderclap. Senator Whitfield had resigned from the United States Senate, citing sudden health concerns. 3 multi-billion-dollar development companies announced emergency board meetings and suspended all trading of their stock. The Environmental Protection Agency simultaneously launched parallel investigations in 12 other cities where similar patterns of contamination and corruption were suspected. At home, Marcus watched the chaos unfold on the news with a sense of profound disbelief. "You never intended for any of this to happen, did you?" his mother said softly. "No," Marcus admitted, "but I'm not sorry that it did." His father came into the room, loosening his tie. "Judge Sterling gave us everything. Names, dates, secret bank accounts. The corruption network is even larger and more insidious than we imagined. But will it actually make a difference? Marcus asked, his voice filled with a lifetime of skepticism. For neighborhoods like ours? His father nodded. The EPA is fast-tracking federal cleanup funds for all the affected areas, and your water monitoring system is being adopted as the national model for community-led environmental oversight. Marcus considered this. From a science project in his garage to a new federal policy. That's how real change happens, his father said. One person, one moment, one refusal to accept the unacceptable. As Sterling continued to cooperate, how high would this investigation reach, and how many more powerful people would fall? 3 months later, Marcus stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., addressing the National Conference on Environmental Justice. His rebuilt, upgraded water analysis system was displayed on a stand beside him, a symbol of a revolution. Environmental justice is not an abstract concept, he told the packed auditorium of scientists, activists, and policymakers. It's about the fundamental right to live without being poisoned. It's about who can drink clean water, who can breathe clean air, and whose children are forced to play on toxic ground. In the front row, his father, Attorney General David Vance, sat next to Laura Chen, who was now the head of a newly created Environmental Justice Task Force at the Department of Justice. My project began as a simple attempt to collect data in my own neighborhood, Marcus continued. It ended by exposing a criminal conspiracy where our environmental laws were selectively ignored to enrich a powerful few at the direct expense of the health and lives of minority communities. Behind him, massive screens showed before and after maps of Port City. 3 months ago, these red zones showed carcinogenic contamination levels that exceeded federal standards by more than 500%. Today, with the reinstatement of proper enforcement and the beginning of federally mandated cleanup, those levels have already dropped by 70%. A roar of applause filled the room. After his speech, Marcus joined a panel discussion. The Vance case, as it's now being called, has fundamentally transformed our entire approach, said the director of the EPA. We have launched similar community-based monitoring programs in 30 cities, and the preliminary data is revealing similar disturbing patterns of selective enforcement. A representative from the Justice Department added, following Senator Whitfield's indictment on 17 counts of conspiracy and corruption, we have opened formal investigations into similar arrangements in 12 other states. Judge Sterling's testimony has been invaluable. Marcus listened, the scale of the fallout still difficult to comprehend. His science project hadn't just exposed a single corrupt judge, it had exposed a nationwide cancer. After the conference, he and his father walked along the National Mall. Whitfield's development company is paying for the full environmental remediation in all affected neighborhoods as part of their settlement, David told him. The deal also includes funding for a new network of community health clinics specializing in treating the respiratory conditions and cancers caused by the contamination. Marcus watched a group of children playing on the grass, their laughter echoing in the crisp autumn air. But will the changes last? He asked. That depends entirely on people like you, his father replied. Systems don't change on their own. They only change when people have the courage to challenge them. Marcus's phone buzzed. It was an email. The state university was offering him a full 4-year scholarship to create a new interdisciplinary program studying environmental science and civil rights law. They want me to expand my monitoring system to cover the entire state, Marcus said, his voice filled with awe. His father smiled, his face beaming with pride. From a high school science project to statewide policy, not bad. I just wanted to help my neighborhood, Marcus repeated, still trying to process it all. I never expected any of this. That's how it almost always happens, his father said, placing a hand on his shoulder. Real change begins when one person refuses to accept injustice, especially when the entire world is screaming at them to know their place. As they continued to walk, a news alert flashed on Marcus's phone. 3 more federal judges in 3 different states had just been placed on administrative leave, pending federal investigation. "It's spreading," Marcus observed quietly. His father nodded. "What you uncovered wasn't an isolated incident, son. It was a symptom of a systemic disease. Sometimes all it takes is one person brave enough to point out a single crack in the foundation to reveal that the entire structure is rotten. And one person willing to stand their ground," Marcus added. "Exactly," his father said, pointing toward the magnificent dome of the Justice Department building in the distance. "Next week, we're announcing a new nationwide environmental justice initiative. It's based, in part, on your monitoring model, community-driven data collection, and transparent, publicly accessible enforcement tracking." As Marcus's work began to spread across the nation, what new, powerful interests would rise to resist these sweeping changes? 1 year later, Marcus walked through his old neighborhood. It was transformed. New trees lined streets that had once been barren and gray. Sleek, professionally manufactured water quality monitors, direct descendants of his original design, stood at key intersections, their data streaming live to a public app that anyone could access. He stopped outside the Port City Federal Courthouse, the place where his life had irrevocably changed. A new bronze plaque near the entrance announced the formation of the Environmental Justice Citizens Review Board, established in the wake of the Sterling Whitfield scandal. He passed through security without a single beep, the guard giving him a nod of recognition and respect. In the grand main hall, an exhibition showcased the city's environmental data, with interactive displays showing the dramatic improvements in water and air quality over the past year. Laura Chen, now a special counsel for environmental justice, met him by a glass case that held his original project, lovingly restored and preserved with a plaque that read, "The Catalyst for Change." "The National Touring Exhibition opens in Chicago next month," she told him. "Your story has directly inspired similar citizen science projects in 47 cities." "How's the judicial reform going?" Marcus asked. 17 federal judges have been formally reviewed for discriminatory ruling patterns. 5 have resigned rather than face a full investigation, she said with a grim smile. "And Judge Sterling? He's performing his community service. Ironically, part of his plea agreement requires him to work in the very neighborhoods his rulings helped poison." They walked into a conference room where his father waited with community leaders. Maps on the wall showed that the red zones of a year ago were now green. Childhood asthma hospitalizations are down 32% in the affected communities, a health department official reported. And we're seeing similar improvements in adult respiratory conditions. His father greeted him with a proud embrace. "Your monitoring system has just been adopted as the new national standard for community air and water quality assessment by the EPA. Marcus shook his head, still humbled by the impact. "It was never about the technology," he said. "It was about asking a simple question. Who deserves to be protected by our laws?" A community leader, a woman who had fought for clean water for decades, stood up. "We have lived with this for generations," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We knew the water was making our children sick. But without data, without proof, our complaints were always dismissed as hysteria." "Sometimes justice needs evidence," his father agreed. "But it always needs people who are willing to stand their ground when they are told to sit down and shut up." After the meeting, Marcus and his father walked through the neighborhood where it all began. Children were playing in a new, state-of-the-art park built on the site of a former illegal chemical dump. "Senator Whitfield's sentencing is tomorrow," his father mentioned. His company has been ordered to fund environmental remediation and community health initiatives for the next 20 years. Marcus watched a group of high school students installing a new, more advanced monitoring station. They were continuing the work, expanding it, improving it. "That's how you know the change is real," his father said, "when it outlives its creators." They stopped at Marcus's old high school, where a banner announced the dedication of the new Marcus Vance Environmental Science Academy. "You know what Judge Sterling told me?" his father said. "During his community service, he said he never believed one person could change an entire system, especially not someone young, someone they'd already written off." "It wasn't just me," Marcus replied. "It was Dr. Evans, and Uncle Ben and Laura Chen. It was the friend at the courthouse, and the community activists. It was everyone who spoke up after the first domino fell." As the sunset bathed the transformed neighborhood in a warm, golden light, Marcus looked at how far they had all come. "The system only works when everyone is equally protected by it," he said. "That's the ultimate lesson here," his father replied. "Justice is never a guarantee. It requires constant vigilance, hard evidence, and the courage to stand against power when it is being abused." Marcus smiled, a simple truth settling in his heart, a truth that had changed his life and his world forever. Your true place in this world is wherever you choose to make your stand. If you found strength and inspiration in Marcus's story, smash that like button to help it reach others who need to hear it. These stories of justice are the lifeblood of change. Subscribe to Beat Stories for more powerful narratives of everyday heroes standing up to systemic injustice. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that their voice, their work, their courage truly matters. One person can, and does, make all the difference. You've witnessed the story. Now, the real question is, what will you do with it? Here at Beat Stories, we believe reflection is powerful, but action is world-changing. Subscribe. Share. Speak up. Because awareness is only the first step on the long road to justice.